I want to go back to something that you said because it felt like you said the school wouldn't let us create an affinity space. My brain says that's partially true because you could have easily created your own separate space. Did you need the school to legitimize the affinity space for some reason? Welcome to Bringing It to the Table with Whit and Flo.
The Black Jewish friendship you didn't know you needed.
We talk about identity, faith, and justice.
And whatever else comes up when two educated, opinionated, badass women come to the table.
All right, so Flo, one of the things that I noticed about how we introduce each other is you say, just call me Flo, right? Or Flo Lo, but you introduce me as the Dr. Whitney Weathers or the future Dr. Whitney Weathers. And it sort of made me think about how when I am in a space that I've never been in before, I introduce myself by my credentials first. Mm-hmm. I'm a doctoral student. I graduated from Vanderbilt, et cetera, et cetera. However, you went to Yale. And there was a few episodes ago where I jokingly panned to the audience and was like, she went to Yale, but you don't really talk about it that much. So in this episode, we're going to talk about education, but I really want to start there. Yale is a good school. Why don't you talk about it?
Yale is a really good school. And I was very, very fortunate to go there. I'm fortunate to have a degree from there.
Yeah.
And, it's a funny thing. When I started equity work, we had this seminar and the person leading it talked about all the different kinds of privilege. And one of my colleagues said, well, you shouldn't assume that everybody here has economic privilege. Some of us had to take loans to be here.
Yeah.
And she said, it takes economic privilege to be able to get a loan.
That part.
So I got into Yale without having ever worked in the arts. I got into the School of Drama for an MFA program in the arts, and it took a degree of privilege to get there. And I am so grateful. It changed my life.
Yeah.
And my master's degree from that school, from that name, has enabled me to be where I am today.
Sure.
My undergraduate degrees have gotten me where I am today.
Sure.
These names matter, and getting to go there is a privilege.
Yeah.
And I don't not use it. I don't want any way to be performative in a false modesty. Having said all of that, I had some really uncomfortable moments in my graduate studies.
Okay.
And I was working in the Jewish nonprofit sector in Jerusalem. I had a life that I loved, and I realized that I had never pursued the professional track that I wanted. Mm-hmm. So I applied to 4 programs in arts administration, theater management. I got into all 4 programs.
Yeah, you did.
I cried my eyes out because I didn't want to leave home, something we'll talk about later. And when I was a finalist, I went to interview and I showed up in person because I never wanted to wonder if I didn't get in. It's because I didn't do everything I could.
Sure.
I wrote about my work in community theater in Jerusalem. I talked about this theater that we had done that brought together English-speaking immigrants and Ethiopian Israelis.
Yep.
I talked about this intersection of arts and social change. I got to my interview with 4 people who, my future was in their hands. And, I had a tour guide all day who looked what I imagined a Yaley looked like, which was not what I looked like.
Sure. Okay.
And then went for this interview. And the first thing they said to me is, we see that you've done art and theater with Ethiopian Israelis, with immigrant groups. What about Palestinians? Have you done theater with Palestinians? The reduction of who I am and everything I brought to the table.
Sure.
A question that was almost accusatory in nature.
Like, have you worked with everybody?
And specifically to reduce, you flew in from Jerusalem at your own expense to come here and interview. You talked about your experience. You told us what you'd done. Yeah. We chose to invite you here.
That's right.
But we want you to answer for this one thing.
Right. You personally.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We've talked about this too, right? You respond. And so I left that interview convinced that Yale didn't want me.
Right.
And I called someone when I got in and said, should I go here? Am I going to feel comfortable here? Because this was a really negative experience for me. There is wonderful work being done in the space of coexistence.
Yes.
And it is important work. And I am glad that work is happening. And that was not the work or the art that I was engaging in.
Sure.
And we can talk about that later.
Yeah.
But what I can tell you is then when I was there, they created affinity spaces.
Yep.
But they said, there's no Jewish affinity space. Let's define affinity space.
Right. So very quickly, an affinity space is a group of individuals who share similar characteristics or identity markers that separate themselves from the larger group in order to have a safe space to talk, to celebrate, to troubleshoot, to problem solve, and things of that nature. So what Flo is saying is there were different affinity groups at Yale. She attempted to create an affinity group for Jewish folks at Yale, and the answer was...
Oh, that's a religion. So you couldn't have a Jewish... No, religion is outside of that category. There's no space for a Jewish space for Jewish people to discuss what they're experiencing.
That is quite reductivist, to say the least. So tell me in that moment is that what you actually heard them saying? Like that, what am I trying to say? What do you think was unspoken? Or what did you hear them say? So you heard them say like Judaism is a religion, but what did you hear them say? What was the narrative that you were creating?
I heard them say Jews don't count.
Uh-huh.
There is a space for every identity group.
Sure.
But Jews are not a separate space. In fact, just yesterday, when you and I were putting together, you deserve the credit, when you were putting together the content, and it was what kind of business.
That's right. That's right. So we were trying to register our podcast as a business, and it said, although we won't announce it, we want to know if you're a part of a minority group. And I was able to click women and, oh Lord, what else? Women and Black, but Jewish was not an option.
When we think about...
But Middle Eastern was.
But not all Jews are Middle Eastern.
Right. Because I thought about clicking that. I was like, well, Flo is Israeli, so I guess I could, but yeah.
I'm most certainly not Middle Eastern. I am most certainly Israeli.
Fascinating.
So, David Baddiel in Jews Don't Count, he writes about this a lot.
Sure.
And one of the things he points to is that when we think about groups that are marginalized or oppressed, we think about groups without power.
Sure.
And if in America you know Jews and you see Jews as successful
and white
and educated, then how could they possibly be oppressed? How could they possibly be marginalized? Again, not all Jews are white.
Right.
And in America, many Jews are white and do experience white privilege. I am one of them.
Sure.
But that's not true for all Jewish people. And we're victims of anti-Semitism, and it's on the rise.
That's right.
So in an affinity space would have been nice. At the time when I first heard about them, it sounded like, wait a minute, you're telling me that there's a white affinity space, so only white people hang out. And then
no, wait, was there really?
There was a white affinity space, yeah.
Wait, hold on, time out. Cut the tape. You said there was a white affinity space?
Well, if we all need spaces where we can be in our identity group.
My Lord. Okay, go ahead.
Wait, let's push on this for just 1 second.
Sure.
Okay. And I'm open, please.
Yep.
Affinity spaces are not necessarily only for marginalized groups, but they are spaces where you are in an identity-based space.
Right.
Okay. So it was very weird when they said all the white people in one room, all the Black people in that. That was weird.
My brain, Lord. Because the premise behind affinity spaces is that all spaces are for straight, white, Christian, able-bodied men. So because all spaces are made with a specific demographic in mind, affinity spaces are carving out those spaces from mainstream spaces. Now, to be fair, affinity spaces that are created in opposition of someone, I think are wrong, as opposed to in celebration of a characteristic that we share. Because quite frankly, you could have one of the things that we run into, especially I was at a major Jewish conference, and my JOC friends and colleagues who were also LGBTQ+, or my JOC colleagues who are also Sephardi, had to pick which affinity group they were going to go to, right? I was not in charge of, but I helped co-lead the Jewish professionals group, and had to pick between that one and like the disability rights space as a person who has an invisible disability. And so like affinity spaces work well, but they also sometimes pigeonhole, right? And you don't want to have an affinity space that's named everybody that's not white, like, right? Like,
or everybody that's not white.
Everybody that's not white, because then there are assumptions. I want to go back to something that you said, because it felt like you said we couldn't create an affinity space. The school wouldn't let us create an affinity space. My brain says that's partially true, because you could have easily created your own separate space. Did you need the school to legitimize the affinity space for some reason?
If it is an officially school-sanctioned group. And I want to go back 1 second.
Yeah.
The rationale that was given to me, and you tell me if this doesn't make sense to you,
sure,
is that for so long, like, white is the unnamed norm and everything else is opposition to
that. That's right.
So having a white affinity space is saying this is not we're going to name whiteness. And so white, instead of just saying, I'm hearing, tell me if I get this right,
sure,
that non-white groups have affinity spaces carved out.
Sure.
But that still feels to me like in reaction to whiteness, whereas saying white is one group, black students are another group. And by the way, intersectionality is real. Some of these categories, as you just said, do overlap. I think that was the reasoning. Does that resonate with you? Does that still not resonate with you?
It doesn't resonate with me, because white is a catch-all category, as is POC, right? Because me being black is not the same as me being like from, let's say, Kenyan American, right? Right. It's not the same as me being black and Canadian, right? I think there are assumptions, or even like having just a POC group in general means that the Latino population and I, right, have a shared character. That's like that lump, that dumping of otherness is problematic because it misses the nuance. And I think whiteness also misses the nuance. Are you Italian American? Are you German American? Are you like, what are you? Because white as a race is a catch-all category for people who have a certain privilege. And that, I think, is why when you're talking about the white affinity group, I have a physical reaction. And I also don't want an affinity group where people are repeatedly told they're bad people. Because I have also seen that when people of color have been separated from white folks, it's because white folks need like a talking to or something like that. And I'm thinking to myself, like, I don't know how you build authentic relationships when the relationship's foundation is shame and shaming.
And, you know, if anyone listens to our other episode, we talk a lot about Black joy and Jewish joy. Here's a phrase I've never used before: white joy. So that white affinity space was not built around any kind of joy.
Let me apologize, Flo. I just rolled my eyes, and that was not at you.
No,
I just don't know. Like, what are you? Right, but it's Jesus keep me.
I don't think either one of us wants to try.
No, we don't want to try to figure that out. But I think in terms of affinity spaces, and the fact that they didn't sanction an affinity space for you, to me, further feeds into the stereotypes that, like, so remember when I said I didn't know Jews needed me, like they didn't need my support because I thought that they had their own thing. It's just not true. And it sounds to me like a level of ignorance and misunderstanding of what being Jewish was also, like you and I have talked about in previous episodes, that Judaism is not just a religion. The first Black person I met that was Jewish was atheist. And he's like my mentor, right? In understanding and navigating the complexities. And it sounds like also they made assumptions about the race of your affinity group, the reason why your affinity group needed to meet. And it sounds like there was a complicated narrative in terms of what you represented by being at Yale.
And who was in the position of power deciding whose spaces were needed?
That's right.
Who had the power to make those decisions and to acknowledge my or deny my lived experience?
That's right.
But I wanted to make sure we did want to talk about education today. That's where this started. Education and pedigree. And I do introduce you as the future Dr. Whitney Weathers.
Yep.
Soon just Dr. Whitney Weathers.
Yes.
And I do that out of respect to you.
Sure.
If there's a different way that you would prefer to be introduced, I would do so. What does that mean? How has education played a role in your life? What does that title mean? Why is it important or not important for you to lead with your credentials?
Well, it's important for a few reasons. My grandmother did not have access to education, I think, outside of the 8th grade. And that was important, right? Like, it's important to know that I am my grandmother's wildest dream. Right. And I think about, in my case, how my 4 parents were denied education. And now education is accessible to me. And I feel like I would be remiss not to take advantage of that. But life ain't always been a crystal stair, to quote, the famous poet Langston Hughes. It's a little bit of a double-edged sword, right? So I remember growing up, and my family members would say, "You talk like a white girl." And I never really knew what that meant. Be clear, my mother has a master's degree in education. So
she has more than one degree.
My mama has a bunch of degrees. Shout out to you, mama. She does have a bunch of degrees. And my mother was also one of the only Black nurses in the hospital where she worked. And she remembers patients saying, "You can't treat me," even though she was the most educated. Absolutely.
Well, they didn't ask if she was educated, right?
No.
They didn't know.
No. Would not let her touch them. Right. And so when I think about, there's a picture, and maybe I'll post it to our Substack, follow our Substack. It's me, my mom, and my sister. All 3 of us have master's degrees, and less than 5% of Black people in the United States have master's degrees.
And we're not even breaking that up by gender.
We're not breaking that up by gender.
Do you know that statistic by any chance?
I don't. I know that it depends on the category, but Black women have traditionally outpaced Black men in terms of going to school. So you were talking to me about education. So I want to talk to you about the education that I got at the Black church, the education that I got at my HBCU, and the education that happened in between that. So after being told that I talked like a white girl, it took me years to actually understand what that meant, because me being educated was in proximity. It was about my proximity to whiteness. Even now, there are people who say like, "Oh, that's $1 million word." And I'm just like, I don't understand why me loving words and loving language. I have 3 degrees in English, by the way. Like, I'm a nerd. Like, I don't know why that has to be relegated to race. And so what I learned very quickly is I needed to be able to code switch even within my own community.
Can you define code switching?
Yeah. So code switching is the ability to amend your language or your mannerisms to fit in the environment that you find yourself in. So for example, if I go to an interview, I ain't gonna go, "Yo, homie, what's good?" Right? Like, first of all, I don't talk like that. Shout out to people who do, but I don't. I wouldn't say that, but I would say, "My name is Whitney Weathers," and blah, blah, blah. Like, you wouldn't hear me. I talk differently based on the circumstance that I find myself in. And I found myself needing to minimize how educated I was, because I didn't fit in the white community because I was too Black. And I didn't fit in the Black community, because I was too white. And so it left me sort of homeless. Where I did find my home and where I did have my first experiences with like education and being educated in like Black pride was the Black church. My pastor was Black. The teachers were Black. At the time, the mayor was Black, right? Like, I remember living in a city that only had 4 Black families, but going to a church where everybody was Black. Everybody was Black. And there were Black doctors and Black lawyers and Black doctors. Like, everybody was Black. And I was like, yes, my people. And because there was a level of educated, there were a group of people in our church who were highly educated. They didn't make fun of me. As a matter of fact, they said, "No, you go and you keep on going, and don't you stop going." So that education there was like, you don't have to be ashamed of who you are, and your faith can fortify you when people try to make you ashamed.
And did that experience at a younger age, did that inform your desire, your decision to go to an HBCU, a historically Black college, as an adult, as a young adult?
So I didn't know what HBCUs were. My sister attended Clark Atlanta. Let me be clear. Yeah. But I didn't know like the significance of that. Sorry, sister. I didn't know the significance of that. But I'll never forget my junior year, one of my very good friends, her mother said to us, we went to something called the Circle City Classic. Are you familiar with the Circle City Classic? In Indianapolis, there's this big Black event called the Circle City Classic where there's a big football game and then there's a Black expo. It's Black people upon Black people upon Black people. And we went there and I remember saying to her, like, this is so stinking cool. And she's like, well, if you like this culture, you should go to an HBCU. And I was like, an HBC what? So just like you, my senior year, I applied to 4 HBCUs, Spelman, Clark Atlanta, Hampton, and TSU, because she took us to those campuses. And when I walked on those campuses, regardless of which one it was, I said, these are my people and this is my home. I got into all 4. And
yeah, you did.
Yeah, I did. And Tennessee State was the most affordable. And so at Tennessee State, whereas the Black church told me I could do it, the school said, but this is how you do it. And my professors were Black, and the band was Black, and the church was Black, and the food in Nashville, Tennessee was Black. And it was fascinating to be in a space again where everyone looked like me.
I'm so honored and humbled to do the work that I do. And when I am invited in to visit an HBCU, it's a sacred responsibility.
Yeah.
It's an honor. I know that is not my space. And I'm really emotionally moved every time that I set foot on a campus and just am able to witness the energy.
Yep.
I don't want to be projecting something, but I do feel that this is a holy space, a special space,
Absolutely.
An empowering space,
Absolutely.
An encouraging space.
Absolutely.
And my undergraduate degree was at a women's school.
Yep.
And I remember that people would say, well, how is this preparing you for the real world if you're in a space that's all women?
Right.
Like, how can this be a
That's
good
right.
thing to segregate yourself? And my answer, I grew up at a Jewish day school.
Yeah.
When we first started, so that was, I didn't make that choice to go there.
Yeah. Remember, I asked you, I said, Flo, why did your parents choose to send you to a Jewish day school instead of a public school? And do you remember what you asked me back? You said, Whitney, why'd you choose to go to an HBCU? And I said, touche.
I want to tell you, only as an adult did I realize, I said to my parents, did grandma and grandpa help make it possible for us to go to a Jewish school? Because when I became an adult, I remembered these things that I knew I wasn't supposed to ask about or would kind of.
Sure.
And they said, yes, they did. And my grandparents weren't religious.
Sure.
And my parents raised us in a very Jewish home, but again, not religious home, but so Jewish.
Okay.
And all me and my brother and my sister, we were all very proud to be Jewish.
Yep.
We love our Jewish identity.
Yep.
We express it in very different ways. I believe in a national Jewish identity, that everything, we'll talk about this more later.
Yeah.
But I want my culture, my calendar, my language to all be expressed. My brother works in synagogues, in music. He's a Jewish artist and so very much ritual and prayer.
Absolutely.
My sister does multi-faith and
Yep.
interfaith activism. So everybody in Jewish education says, how do we ensure continuity? And it's simpler in an Orthodox environment. And so my parents instilled Jewish education, Jewish identity, and Jewish values, not from a monolithic place.
Yeah.
So that's very expensive to give kids a Jewish education, and they were determined to do so.
Which is a whole nother story for a whole nother day, right?
Access to wealth, upward mobility, privilege. I mean, you have to have privilege to take loans. But I will tell you, that school, which, by the way, by total coincidence, is like a 2-minute drive from here.
Yep.
And I don't know if I'll get to go see it. I haven't been there since I was 11 or 12 years old.
Yeah.
I still have such positive associations with that place.
Yeah.
Because it was a It was a cocoon.
Yep.
It got me excited about Hebrew. It
That's
got me
right.
excited about, it made me proud to be Jewish.
That's right.
You asked me in one of the first things we filmed, like why I was proud to be Jewish, what it means. And I think it came from being in a space of being with my people.
That's right.
And so then you go out into the world and you deal with a whole bunch of ugly or a whole bunch of,
that's right.
But to have those spaces where you just know you're with your people and to be embraced.
Yep. Which is why it was so problematic, I'm imagining, for Yale to say, no, you can't have that space. You don't need that space is what they said. But the truth of the matter is those affinity spaces, whether in synagogue, day school, HBCUs, they fortify you to go combat all the negativity that you experience outside of those walls, outside of those protective walls. As we close, what's the so what of being educated? Because we're talking about affinity spaces, but if someone is watching this and doesn't maybe identify with affinity spaces or doesn't have an affinity space, like what are we trying to get at with this conversation about education?
I mean, I'm gonna need your help with this one,
Whitney.
Yeah. I will say that education can be a path to upward mobility.
Yes.
I will say that many pathways to education are blocked to people without privilege. I will say that some of our education structures are defined by power structures.
Yes.
So whether or not, we did not talk about today, but to be clear, there's intelligence and being smart, and there's education.
That's right.
And those are related, but also parallel
and wisdom
spheres.
to boot. Yeah.
I think where we got to today was that there's a real value in being educated in spaces where you can bring your full identity to the table.
That's it.
And that fortifies you. It gives you the joy that fortifies you moving forward.
That's right.
Did I miss anything?
No, I think that's the so what. And if you don't have those spaces, be the change that you wish to see, right? Like create those spaces and don't wait for anybody's permission. So now it's your turn. Take this talk, stir it up with your people, and see what rises, whether it's at the Shabbat table,
the Sunday dinner table,
or the coffee table. Don't forget to bring it.
And remember, you always have a seat at our table.